decided to join us, so that's great. And as part of the evening, we do 20% off all fiction for the day, so that's for the evening, so that's great too. So the first thing we do is that we have a short little book talk about one of our other books. So I'm going to go ahead and start that off. I'm the chosen person this time. And my book is, I'm going to be talking about The Ballad of Peckham Rye by Muriel Spark. And Dame Muriel Spark was born in Edinburgh in 1918. And she was a Scottish novelist, a short story writer, a poet, and an essayist. After teaching English and working as a secretary, she married Sidney Spark in 1937. Although she left him 3 years later, she kept his name for her writing. She worked in intelligence for the remainder of World War II. And her writing career took off after the war ended, and she started writing poetry and literary criticism, becoming the editor of the Poetry Review. When she turned to fiction, her second novel, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which was published in 1961, became a success and was actually made into a movie in 1969. She died in 2006 after having written over 20 novels and many essays, poems, and literary criticisms. In 2008, The Times named Spark as number 8 on its list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. The Ballad of Peckham Rye, which is this gorgeous edition of this book, starts with a wedding and ends with one. But the wedding that was, or was not, to be is a starting and ending, and is climax and prelude to the story. Spark's telling of the story is rather circular and adds to the enjoyment of the tale. The story is about a small hamlet in England, 2 factories, local people, and a stranger who shows up one day and manages to stir the pot with such frenzy, it's like watching water slowly boil and then spill out the top. The man is Dougal Douglas. He's Scotch in an English town and is full of confidence and a plan for his own advancement. With a badly hunched shoulder, he's not the textbook idea of handsome, but he has an air about him that women and men alike seem to find intriguing. Some hate him and some love him, but no one seems to be unaffected. Here's a quote from early in the book. A conversation includes one of his harshest critics. Connie Whedon, daughter of the personnel manager, typed on and said, "My dad says he's nuts, but I say he's got something, definitely. Got something, all right. Got a good cheek. My young brother doesn't like him. My mom likes him. My dad likes him so-so. Humphrey likes him. I don't agree to that. The factory girls like him. What can you say? What do you expect? I don't like him. He's got funny ideas." The book is set in the early 1950s. Time and motion studies have arrived in Peckham Rye and make the factory run as efficiently as possible. People were used to hearing about the best way to run a factory line, the fewest motions required, the way to get the most work out of every person. Into this backdrop, a discussion of the importance of the arts comes onto the scene to remind factory managers that there's more to the simple efficiency involved than getting the most out of your employees. When we first meet Dougal, he's a man interviewing for a job. He's calculated in his answers and comments and careful to mimic the interviewer's words, building interest and excitement and presenting himself favorably. Here's a passage from that interview. "We feel there's a place for an artsman to bring vision into the lives of the workers. Wonderful people, but they need vision, we feel. Motion studies did marvels at the factory. We had a man from Cambridge advising on motion study. It speeded up our output 30%. Movements required to do any given task were studied in detail, and he worked out the simplest pattern of movement involved in the least loss of energy and time." "The least loss of energy and time," Dougal commented. "The least loss of energy and time," said Mr. Druce. "All our workers' movements are now designed to conserve energy and time in feeding the line. You'll see it on posters all over the factory. Conserve energy and time in feeding the line." "In feeding the line," Dougal said. "In feeding the line," Mr. Druce said. There is one brief slip-up when Dougal lets a bit of his own thought come through a bit later in the exchange. "The world of industry," Dougal said, "throbs with human life. It will be my job to take the pulse of the people and plumb the industrial depths of Peckham." Mr. Druce said, "Exactly. You have to bridge the gap and hold out a helping hand. Our absenteeism," he said, "is a problem." "They must be bored with their jobs," said Dougal, in a split second of absent-mindedness. He quickly recovers, and we rarely see that honesty break through again. Spark's dialogue is fast and witty, and it speeds up whenever Dougal is involved. It reminds me of watching an old movie exchange between Groucho Marx and the unwitting normal person who has come into his sphere. Or if you ever watched the TV show Psych, listening to Sean's ramblings when surrounded by normal people. Most people take his words and decide for themselves what the nonsense means, sometimes resulting in unfortunate events and misunderstandings. Others are so confused by trying to make sense of it that it drives them to distraction. In fact, some characters always seem ready to duke it out with Dougal, resulting in frequent dust-ups that usually leave others rather than he worse for the event. But while the action is quick and ridiculously convoluted, there are a few dark turns that you'd never see in a Marx Brothers movie. It's not enough that he gets what he wants. He pushes people to actions that are often not in their own interest. He encourages people to take advantage of others. He seems to set up situations that leaves others a worse for the encounter. So much so that when Dougal shares with people evidence that he is actually the devil, you start to wonder if it is so. He blows into town, stirs everything up, leaves people questioning their beliefs, their routine, their morals, much like the stranger in John Updike's The Witches of Eastwick. This book has just enough of the bizarre in it to make it intriguing amidst the calm backdrop of the working class era of 1950s England. This is a short book and it reads quickly because you get engaged with all the characters in the story. And as soon as I got to the end, I started it over because knowing how it ended would impact my understanding of the beginning. And maybe that's what Muriel Spark intended. We have a really nice selection right now of Muriel Spark's works, especially a lot of the lovely new editions from New Directions. So we hope you take a look at them if you like. Oh, thank you. So we'll start.